I used to think that the loneliest sound in Oklahoma was the wind moving through the dry grass at night. I was wrong. The loneliest sound is hooves on an empty road when you know there are no animals around. My grandmother warned me about her when I was little. She told me like a campfire story, but she never smiled when she said her name. She said only say that some things wore beauty the way hunters wore camouflage. She would look towards the fields and behind her house and tell me never to follow a woman I met near the road after dark, no matter how lost I looked, and no matter how sweet her voice was, and no matter how much I thought she needed help. She grew up around those warnings, so naturally I ignored them once I got old enough to think for myself. The first time I saw her was outside Arandarco, a 2-lane road where the fields stretched flat and black beneath the moon. I had been driving home after visiting an old friend, and I remember feeling tired in that dangerous way that the road starts breathing under your headlights. There were no houses close by, no gas stations, no porch lights, just the pale lane of the road and the yellow grass shifting on both sides. Then my headlights caught a woman standing near the ditch. She was wearing a white dress. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was that she wasn't shivering, even though it was night and it was cold enough for frost. I slowed down before I meant to. She stood with her back half turned, long black hair hanging over her shoulder, one hand lifted like she was asking me to stop. Every part of me knew better, and every old warning from my grandmother came crawling back into the ends of my mind. But there was a cruel trick the mind plays on you when you see someone alone in the dark. Fear tells you to keep driving. Guilt asks what kind of person would leave someone there stranded on the side of the road. So I stopped. I rolled down the window just a few inches. "Are you okay?" I asked. She turned her face towards me. I can't explain how beautiful she was without making it sound normal, but it wasn't normal. It was too perfect. Like something remembered from a dream, but only in real life. Her eyes looked dark at first, and then caught the headlights, and then they flashed gold. "My car broke down," she said. Her voice was soft and flat, but it carried through the cold, like she was speaking right behind my ear. I looked past her. There was no car. "Where's your car?" She smiled. "Not far." The word settled wrong in my stomach. Not far. That could mean 100 yards, and that could mean 10 miles. That could mean somewhere no living person should go. I told her I could call somebody. I reached for my phone, but there was no service. Not even one bar. She stepped closer. I saw her feet then. Not clearly, just enough. The hem of her dress shifted in the wind, and beneath it I saw narrow legs, pale at the ankles, then something dark and hard where feet should have been. They were hooves. My hand tightened on the steering wheel. She saw me notice. The smile never left her face. "Care to take me home?" she asked. I put the talk in drive. My hand shot out and grabbed the edge of my window. Her fingers looked human, but they were cold and strong, stronger than anything that should have been for a woman her size. Her nails scraped the glass with a dry clicking sound. "You stopped," she whispered. "That means you saw me." I hit the gas. For 1 second, she held on, moving beside the truck without running, her dress floating like smoke. Then she let go, and the truck lurched forward. I watched her in the rearview mirror. She stood in the road, smaller and smaller, as the lead glow of my taillights illuminated her. And she bent forward, not like a woman, but like an animal preparing to leap. I didn't look again. I drove too fast the rest of the way home. When I reached my grandmother's old house, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely lift them to turn the key in the lock. She had passed 3 years before, but the house still smelled like cedar. Nobody else in the family wanted to maintain a place that sat so far from town. I had told myself I liked the quiet, and that night, quiet became something else. It became a room holding its breath, and I locked the door, checked the windows, and sat in the kitchen table until sunrise. Nothing ever happened. So by morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined the hooves. Maybe she was barefoot, or maybe it was shadows that played tricks with my mind, and maybe it was the exhaustion that made me see this. Then I went outside. There were hoof prints in the dirt around my truck. Not deer tracks wandering by, not random, they circled 3 times. Dad lined up to the porch and stopped in the front door. I did not go to work that day. I called in sick and spent the morning pacing the house, trying to make sense of something that refused to make sense. Around noon, I drove into town and found my Uncle Ray at the feed store. Ray was my grandmother's youngest brother, a man who survived Vietnam and tornadoes, and bad marriages, and one tractor that rolled over, and still, somehow, believed black coffee was stronger medicine than anything the doctor had prescribed. He saw my face and knew immediately what happened. I told him everything. At first he listened without expression, but when I mentioned the who's, his jaw tightened. "You didn't invite her in, did you?" "No." "You didn't give her your name?" I fought back. "No." "You didn't touch her?" I remembered her hand on the window. She touched my truck. And then he looked away. That might be enough. I wanted him to laugh then. I wanted him to slap the counter and tell me he was messing with me. Instead, he told the cashier he would be back later and walked outside. In the parking lot, he leaned and said, "Your grandmother warned you because she saw one." I stared back at him. "She told me stories." "No," he said. "She warned you because she survived." He told me it happened when she was young, before I was born, before my mother was even born. There had been a dance near Carnegie, some summer gathering with music and food and too many young men trying to prove they were grown. One of those men was my grandmother's cousin, Daniel. He was handsome and loud and always laughing, way too much. Near midnight, he wandered off with a woman nobody recognized. They found him the next morning in a creek bed, alive but barely. His face had gone ashen white, and his hair had a streak of gray that had not been there the day before. He kept saying she had danced with him. That was all. That she had danced with him until the music faded and until the ground turned soft beneath her feet, or beneath his feet, and until he looked down and realized the steps were leaving hoof prints in the mud. He lived 3 more days. Before he died, he told my grandmother the woman had whispered a promise in his ear. "Your family will know me." Ray pulled a cigarette from his shirt pocket but didn't write it. Your grandmother believed things follow bloodlines. Not all the time. Not every generation. But these things remember who you are. I looked back towards the road, half expecting to see a white dress between the parked cars. What does she want? Ray shook his head. Depends which story you believe. Some say she punishes men who hurt women. Some say she lures the faithless, the cruel, the drunk, and the violent. And some say she's older than all the punishment, and that she just likes the chase. I didn't do anything. Ray looked at me sadly. Most people don't think they did. That bothered me more than anything else, he said. Because when someone tells you a monster only comes for the guilty, you immediately start searching your life for the thing that called it. I drove home before sunset. Ray told me not to, but I didn't want to leave the house empty. That place was all I had left of my grandmother, and some stubborn part of me refused to be chased away by hoofprints and stories. The first night after talking to Ray, I left everything on. At 11:47, the power went out. The house dropped into darkness so complete it felt physical. The refrigerator stopped humming, and the heater clicked off. Then from outside, I heard singing. It was a low, mournful, beautiful voice of a woman. It came from somewhere beyond the porch, drifting through the walls like smoke. The melody was old, or at least it felt old. It had no words I could understand, but it carried sorrow in it, deep enough to make my throat tighten. I stood in the kitchen with a flashlight in my hand and didn't move. The singing circled the house, slowly, past the kitchen window, past the living room door, and then back again, and with it the sound of hooves pressing into the dirt. When she reached the front porch, the singing stopped. 3 knocks came at the door. They were polite, like a neighbor stopping by. I held my breath, and then her voice came. You were kind enough to stop for me. I backed away from the door. You can be kind again. The knob turned. I'd locked it. The deadbolt held. The knob held harder. Wood creaked in the flame, and then she laughed softly. It was the same laugh you hear from someone amused by a child hiding under a table. I know this house, she said. The floorboards above me groaned. I looked up, and the sound moved across the ceiling one step after another. And then she was inside. I ran. I don't remember deciding to run. I grabbed my keys from the counter and sprinted from the back door. The hallway seemed longer than it ever had been, stretched by panic. Beneath me, something moved down the stairs with calm, measured steps. I tore the back door open and bolted into the yard. The moon was bright enough to sliver the glass. My truck sat quietly, feet away. Between me and it stood the woman in white. Her hair moved through, but there was no wind. She smiled as if she had planned to meet me there. You keep leaving, she said. I stumbled backwards. From the inside of the house, I heard footsteps reach the kitchen. The woman in front of me tilted her head. That was when I understood. That was more than one sound. It was more than one presence. Either she could move in ways I could not understand, or she was not alone. And the kitchen door behind me creaked. I ran for the field. It was stupid. There was nowhere else to go. But terror doesn't care about strategy, and I was terrified. I only wanted distance, and so I crashed through the grass and the weeds, hearing my own breath tear in my chest. Behind me came the hooves, fast, They struck the ground in a rhythm that made my bones feel hollow. I reached the old tire line, or the old tree line behind the property, and ducked beneath the cottonwood branches, whipping my face. The singing started again, closer this time, weaving between the trunks. I tipped over a root and hit the ground hard. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Then the woods went silent, and I rolled onto my back. She was now just a few yards away. The white dress was stained with mud at the hem. Her face was still beautiful, but not as much. Something beneath it twitched, as if the human shape were only a mask. "You saw my feet," she said. I couldn't speak. "That is why you ran." She stepped closer. The moonlight showed her feet clearly now. They were hooves, dark, narrow, shiny hooves, not costume hooves. They were a deer. She crouched beside me, and up close she smelled like rain on hot dirt, crushed grass, and something coppery. "Men always look too late," she whispered. "I didn't hurt you," I said. Her smile faded. "No, but you carry the name of someone who did." "I fought a Daniel, my grandfather's cousin," the story Roy told me. "That was before I was born." She leaned in closer, her eyes not human anymore. They were wide and dark, reflecting the moon like an animal's eyes. Blood remembers what mouths deny. Then she touched my forehead. The woods vanished, and I was standing in another night. Music played somewhere beneath me. Fiddles and drums and laughter. Firelight flickered over faces I didn't recognize, and I saw a young man walking with a woman in white, his arm around her waist, his mouth close to her ear. He was drunk and smiling, confident in that ugly way that some men get when they think nobody will tell them no. The woman tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, and the vision shifted, and they were further from the fire now, near the creek. His voice turned sharp, hers stayed calm, and he grabbed her wrist. Then she changed. Not all at once, just enough. Her legs bent wrong, her feet struck mud as hooves. Her eyes flashed gold, and the young man screamed. But before the vision ended, I saw something. My grandmother, young and hidden from behind the trees watching. She saw what Daniel had done, and she saw what the woman became. And when the dear woman turned her face towards the trees, my grandmother covered her mouth to keep from crying. The vision snapped away. I was back on the ground, shaking. The dear woman stood over me. "He called me a monster before he called himself cruel," she said. I wanted to say I wasn't him. I wanted to say the debt wasn't mine, but the words died in my mouth before the vision had shown me something I hadn't expected. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a wound left open for decades, passed down through the silence because nobody wanted to admit why it began. My grandmother knew. Yes. Why didn't you take her? The dear woman looked towards the house, barely visible through the trees. She told the truth to those who would listen. That spared her. But truth fades when descendants turn warnings into campfire stories. The wind moved through the cotton trees. For the first time I realized she wasn't looking at me with hunger. She was looking at me with judgment. And that was much worse. "What do you want from me?" She stepped back. "Remember correctly." Then she turned and walked into the trees. The darkness swallowed her dress first, and then her hair, and then her entire pale shape. The last thing I heard were hooves fading into the grass. I stayed on the ground, until dawn. When I finally walked back to the house, the door was locked. The power was on. Nothing inside was disturbed. But the kitchen table sat my grandmother's old Bible. I had not taken it out. Inside, between two yellowed pages, was a faded photograph that I had not seen before. It was my grandmother as a young woman, standing beside Daniel. He looked exactly how Ray described him. On the back, in my grandmother's handwriting, were 4 words. She was not evil. I called Ray and told him everything. He came over without asking questions. We sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the photo between us. Eventually he said, "Your grandmother tried to tell people after Daniel died. Family didn't want to hear it. Said it was shameful. Said he was a good boy." I looked at the picture. She didn't misunderstand. "No," Ray said. She didn't. That afternoon, we went to the cemetery where Daniel was buried. It was a small family plot west of town, half forgotten and half overgrown. His stone leaned to one side and the letters worn but still readable. Ray brought a shovel. We cleared the weeds, and then I did something that felt strange but necessary. I spoke aloud. Not to Daniel, but to the land. I said what he had done, and I said my grandmother had seen it, and I said our family had buried the truth with him and called the thing that punished him a curse because he was easier than calling it justice. The wind picked up as I spoke. Grass bent around the cemetery, and when I finished, I expected a thunder, a sign of something dramatic. But there was only silence. Then from behind the fence came the soft sound of hooves. Ray and I turned, and at the edge of the field, a doe stood. She was large and still, and watching us through the grass, and for the moment, her eyes caught the sun and flashed gold. Then she lowered her head and walked away. Ray crossed himself even though he hadn't been to church in 20 years. "Maybe that's it," he said. I wanted to believe him. For a while I did. Weeks passed, then months. There was no more activity. Life returned to normal for me, or as normal as it can after you have something like this happen. But some stories don't just end because one person survives them. That winter, a man went missing near Fort Cobb Lake. He had been in a bar before he disappeared. People said that he left angry after arguing with his girlfriend in the parking lot. Witnesses saw him shove her hard enough that she fell. They found his truck on the dirt. Driver's door open, keys inside. The ground around it was covered in hoof prints. Hunters argued online about whether deer can move that way. I said nothing. But every time I passed a field at night, I looked twice. Not because I feared she would come for me, but because part of me feared I would see her and understand why she was there. I was driving back from Chickasha after visiting Ray at the hospital. His heart was getting bad, though he wouldn't admit it. It was late and the storms were building in the west and turning the sky purple. About 10 miles from home, I saw brake lights ahead. A car sat crooked on the shoulder. A man stood beside it yelling at somebody inside. And as I got closer, I saw a woman in the passenger seat flinch when he slammed his hand against the roof. I pulled over 50 yards and called 911. This time my phone had service. Across the road in the tar glass stood a tall woman in a white dress. Rain began to fall. Her hair stayed dry. The man backed away. The woman in the car opened her door and ran towards my truck. I unlocked it and she climbed in. The man didn't follow. The police arrived 15 minutes later, and they found the man wandering the field hysterical, covered in mud. He kept saying a deer had spoken to him in a woman's voice. Nobody believed him. I never told the police what I saw. What would I say? That an old legend walked out of the grass and scared a violent man into telling on himself? I kept quiet. But before I drove away that night, I looked into the field, and at the edge of the storm, I saw the deer woman stood watching me. I don't know why I did. Maybe gratitude and maybe fear, maybe both. I lowered my head just enough. Since then, I've learned to respect certain roads after dark. I do not stop for a beauty standing on the side of the road, and I do not mock old mornings. And if you ever see her standing on the side of the road, don't you dare stare too long. Look down. If the dress moves and you see what she really is and what she stands on, it's already too late. Drive on. Tell the truth. And pray those hooves are not the ones following you.